I go to a call pretty young. I'm not that far into my career, pretty early on. A father had drowned his daughter. She's still alive when I get there.
Wow.
So I'm trying to work on the baby to bring her back.
Wow.
Can't do it. Paramedics show up. They're working on the baby. They can't. Baby dies. After that call is over, I get dispatched to another call.
Yeah.
I don't decompress. Like, that's heavy. And that's what we signed up for, but without this eternal view, this knowledge of there is an eternal life, that stuff would have crushed me.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to the March or Die Show today. Very glad to have you joining me and excited about this episode. This episode, I have a special guest on. We're going to meet him in just a second and talk about the future of this show, the March or Die Show. So a lot of good things to cover before we get there. However, if you are not yet subscribed to the show, do that right now. Don't wait. You're going to wait. You're going to say, I'll get to it later. You're never going to get to it. These episodes will be pushed out. You won't have access to them, so make sure you subscribe, and that would be fantastic. And then take some time, go over to the website, marchordie.com, marchordie.com. Great content there. All of our contact information, archived episodes, all of that is at marchordie.com. So go and check that out. My guest today, sitting here right next to me, for those of you that watch the March or Die Show, and you can watch it on YouTube, I don't do a lot of in-person interviews, but I have the opportunity to do that today. So Sean, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, man.
Sean Kennard is my guest today. What can I say about Sean? There are probably a lot of things I can't say, but we're going to get to know you a little bit. Sean works for, right now, the Mighty Oaks Foundation. We both work for the Mighty Oaks Foundation, and we were connected through a mutual friend. And we're going to spend some time developing March or Die, and having a lot of conversations over the next many months. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, super pumped.
But before we do that, I thought it was important for people to get to know you.
Yeah,
let's do it. Sean is a former police officer, SWAT officer, jiu-jitsu black belt, husband, father. You do it all.
Yeah.
You do it all.
I do a little bit, yeah.
I didn't say you did it well, but you do it all.
I do it all. There we go. Well, yeah.
So let's get your background, right? I think it's fascinating when we look at people in law enforcement, look at people in the military, wherever, kind of those services. It's pretty unique. It's pretty specific. And so I'm always curious as to how someone got there.
Yeah.
So talk about your upbringing a little bit, and then how you got into law enforcement, and then we'll talk about your career.
Yeah. So, I mean, I had good parents. I think they would say that this phrase we hear all the time about, I did the best I could with what I had, right? Yeah. So good parents, they definitely gave us a better life than they had. But my parents split when I was about 8 years old. They divorced. And so, I mean, that of course rocks any family, no matter who it is, especially for an 8-year-old that doesn't really completely understand that, so, and both kind of went their separate ways, and I love my father. He's a great man, but he had, he struggled with that pretty deeply. And so I kind of grew up without a whole lot of guidance, and during that time of my life, during an integral time of my life. And so I kind of had to, figure it out a little bit for myself, And so I'm thankful for that now. And I've told my father this, and it probably hurt him more than I intended it to. I meant it as something I'm really thankful for, because it did help shape me into the man that I am today. But, I've told him that, some of the things that happened that would seem like, what people would call a failure on his part. Yeah. It actually shaped, who I am today, because I looked at that and said, I don't want to do that.
Right.
Right. And so, grew up, going to school, playing football, being a kid. To be completely honest, contrary to probably most cops, I didn't think about being a cop my entire life. I think at some point every little boy probably says, I want to be a police officer, right? Like, dress up as a cop and wear the cool cap guns that, know. So, sure. I think at some point, yes. But honestly, I thought I was going to play football for the rest of my life. And I was good at football, but I wasn't big enough. And so when that kind of failed, I just kind of found myself, working at a restaurant, serving tables, and I'm like, what am I doing with my life,
Yeah.
And so I had always kind of thought, police officer would be a cool job, and firefighter.
Kind of in the back of your head somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I kind of evaluated that for a little while. Firefighter, police officer. I thought it would be cooler to carry a gun, honestly. So
you are from Texas.
Yes, I am from Texas, and we love guns in Texas. So that was kind of, I'm working in a restaurant. I'm like, what am I doing? Trying to figure out life, wrestling with what it looks like to be a man, trying to figure that out as a young man. And so anyway, so I chose the path to go through law enforcement, and became a detention officer at a jail, and then got through an academy and became a cop.
Yeah. So you said that you had to figure it out on your own. Were there some influences in your life, though, some male influences that helped to guide you, whether it was a coach or a teacher or someone else in your life? Yeah,
absolutely. I love this. I love this question because I think it's so important for people who maybe have had to figure it out on their own, that they look for this type of a relationship with somebody, this community with somebody. And so I was lucky enough to, for one, I had coaches, and coaches are great. Most coaches are great. But I at this restaurant I worked at, I had this guy, Patrick Rowe, and he was a pastor that he just started a church, and he was working as a server to pay bills while he was leading a church on Sundays.
No kidding.
And just doing what the Lord called him to do. He saw, to be honest, I don't know, the Lord must have just spurred him to crack that conversation with me. And I was interested. My parents they raised us to believe in God, but we had no relationship with that. There was no relationship. There was like an idea of there's a creator, but there was no relationship with him. And so I had a very, broken view of what it looked like to have a relationship with the Lord. I thought he was like this tyrant, like squishing ants on And so Patrick really broke that for me. And no joke, I mean, he would bring his Bible, and we would go meet somewhere, and he would crack open the Bible, and we would just talk about it. And so that was really important for me. Really, really a pivotal moment in my life. Here I am, like 18-year-old kid, trying to figure out what it looks like to be a man. Not really having a whole lot of, solid examples of that in my life. And he took that moment to kind of guide me. So, had I not had that, I mean, I'm not entirely sure what my life would look like now. And I used that as an opportunity to realize that I need, as men, we need that accountability. We need that consistency of somebody checking on you. And he was that first exposure of that. And then I just adopted that and found other like-minded men throughout the course of my life that would do that same thing.
That's good. It is interesting at that point in your life when you're, a young teenager, so 16, 17 into 18, young adulthood, trying to figure this thing out. A lot of the time as young men, we're asking the question, what makes a man? What is a man? And we're trying to understand that. I heard a great phrase this weekend, that we always ask the question, what makes a man? And instead of asking what makes a man, we need to start asking who makes a man. And when we get to the point where we stop asking the question, what is it that makes a man? What events or what activities or what thing do I need to do to become a man? And we realize it's not what makes a man, it's who makes a man. It's God that creates in us what he wants us to be. That changes our entire perspective and the course of our lives. But we have to have somebody that can guide that for us. Because if we don't, then we're always going to be floundering, trying to chase, as men, it's like, well, I'm going to chase women because that's what makes a man, or I'm going to chase, sports or the military or law enforcement or whatever.
Or money,
because that's what makes me a man. But no, it's really a question of who makes a man, and the rest follows.
Absolutely. So that was, pivotal for
That's
me.
Good.
Patrick married, Delynn, my wife, married us. He was very, very impactful in my life. So he was that figure. And like I said, I think it's important for men who haven't had that to search for that and to find it.
You talked about your parents, and you said they would say, we did the best we could. And I've said that about my own parenting. I've said that to other parents. We do the best we can with what we have and what we know. And that marriage is difficult. And, even the best of marriages, there are struggles and there are challenges. What are some things that you wish your parents had known, did the best they could with what they had, right? But what are some things you wish they had known? And I won't say for their marriage, but going through that, separating, divorcing, but what should they have known to help you work through that as a young person?
Yeah, I think communication is key. I think as parents, even me as a parent, sometimes we feel like it's easier if we don't explain the hard stuff, And so I think even if they got to that point, I think that they could have definitely done it. I mean, there was really no conversation. There was no explanation. It was just like parents are now like you're together and now they're not, And so I think that, our kids, man, they just look at we are their example of life, That's right. And so that's already a confusing situation for a child. And so when nothing's explained, and there's no process of how to cope with that or how to deal with that, then I mean now that confusion is expanded. It's tenfold of what it could be. And so as far as them, I can tell you this, they weren't in community. They weren't in, they didn't have a church community. They weren't doing life together with people that would hold them accountable. Yeah. And I come from, my family, both of them come from very, very, very disruptive childhoods, like traumatic.
They were doing what they knew.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And honestly, like, I really honor my parents because their childhoods were, horrific. Yeah. So what we got was great compared to what they got.
They were trying to be different than where they came from.
And they did. Yeah. And they did that, So, we can sit here and say, well, what could they have done? Like, I know you're specifically saying as far as this after the divorce, but, I'm super passionate about this topic because I think that if we can change marriages, that we can change lives forever.
No, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
So I think that obviously being in community, being surrounded by like-minded people, believing that the other person is good at the end of the day because they were created by the creator of all things, right, who is good. Right. That would have gone a long way. But for us specifically, I think just communication, for anybody who's going through that, like, it's kind of like, your kid's, pet dies and you go and like try to get another pet to replace it. But there's no, it's just kind of like there's
never explain it.
Exactly. Right. There's no explanation. So it's a crude example, but I think that would have helped a lot.
It's a good example. I'm asked a lot, with our kids. And so we have older kids. I have a 24-year-old and a 23-year-old, and then 16 and 14. And my two older kids, they're adults, they're working, they're doing well. And I've been asked a lot, what did you do with them? Like, what was the key? Like, man, we did a lot of things wrong, but I think the one thing we did right was we had family dinners together every night. And that created a lot of conversation. So as things came up in our lives and as things came up in their lives, there was this place we already were going to go to every night and sit down and have hard conversations.
Yeah.
And again, we did a lot of things wrong, but I think that is a huge key. Your kids need that direction.
Yeah.
And when we're hurting as parents, it's easier for us to just say, go play video games or go out with your friends or do whatever. But they have big questions they need answered. They're going to get them answered somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That, we can talk about this more as we get into the show, but, having children myself, having adopted a teenager, the consistency and structure that is provided in a healthy home is what children thrive on.
Right.
And so when you break that consistency and structure, then the child breaks, and you see that in the child's behavior and in their, how they respond to things, how they act, how they talk. And so I think that, some things happen in life that we can't control,
right,
but as much of consistency and structure that you can maintain through effective communication and healthy lifestyle choices as a family is going to keep that rift from being too big.
Yeah, that's good. So you went into law enforcement. You had that influence in your life. Did you become a Christian at that time before you went into law enforcement?
Yeah. So I would say now in my walk where I'm at now, I would have called myself lukewarm. We're
Sure.
Used to that term. I was still trying to figure it out. Was not doing it, great. But I was on a path. I was walking a path and stumbling a lot. But I was on that path. So I went into law enforcement with a much stronger foundation than what I had for sure. It wasn't until later that really developed.
I did an interview with Sheriff Chad Bianco, who is the sheriff in Riverside County in California, where I live. And Sheriff Bianco is a Christian. He's a well-known Christian, very conservative and very outspoken. And he in that interview talked about how, I was like, what's one message you wish you could give to all your deputies as they're starting their career? And he said, the one message I wish I could give is you need to have faith. You need to have a foundation of faith. You're going to see some crazy things and experience some crazy things. And without that foundation of faith, you're going to really struggle. And I thought that was interesting coming from him. He's been in law enforcement for 30 years. Yeah. He's done all of these different things, right? But his one message, not, be safe, be careful, do this, do that, whatever. It's, hey, if you want a long career, you need to start with the foundation of faith. How important was that? Even though it was lukewarm, you're trying to figure it out. Yeah. How important was that for you getting into, because you became a SWAT officer and, doing all these crazy things you've done in your life, but starting there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, man, I was an instructor for a while too. And I would tell the recruits, without making the class faith class,
right.
That I don't know how you could be a successful police officer and go home and be a successful husband and father or wife, mother without a faith. You can't do both of those without a faith.
Yeah.
Because the things that we're exposed to, it's traumatic. They're traumatic things, and it's different than, obviously you come from a military background. It's different than war. But it's traumatic. You take a police officer, and the way the system is set up, is hard too. So for example, I go to a call pretty young as I'm not that far into my career, pretty early on. The father had drowned his daughter. She's still alive when I get there.
Wow.
So I'm trying to work on the baby to bring her back.
Wow. Can't
do it. So the paramedics show up, they're working on the baby. They can't, baby dies. Well, after that call is over, I get dispatched to another call.
Yeah.
I don't decompress. Right. That's heavy. And that's what we signed up for, but without this eternal view, this knowledge of there is an eternal life, that we live in, and have the ability to take part in, that stuff would have crushed me.
Yeah.
It would have crushed me. And that's one example of thousands, I talk about this all the time. And people, when people get upset because a cop was, rude to them or something, I'm like, and I get it. Like, it's not acceptable.
Right.
Yeah. I think police officers should be held to a higher standard, but also I think that citizens should be aware that, like, hey, you don't know what that guy just left.
What he just came from.
Literally just came from. I've been on calls, children, and it's always the children's the worst, worst, and the worst wrecks. Things that you see that in your mind don't seem real, because it's like, how is that real? And so, I think in law enforcement, we don't talk about this as much as we should. Because I think there's this idea that we're supposed to keep all this locked up, right? Which is the most poisonous thing that we can do. And
that's what happens, right? And you mentioned it's not combat. We work with a lot of veterans, a lot of people in the first responder community. And although the trauma of war and combat can be very acute, and it causes a lot of problems, I would never diminish that. It is different in that you leave combat and then you come home. But for those in law enforcement and the fire service, and I've had to explain this way to me. You go to a call, firefighter explained this to me. I went to a call I had to scrape a child's body off the road. And then I had to go back to the station and change my uniform and go do a community pancake breakfast.
Yeah.
I've never forgotten that. That's how he explained what he did, right? Yeah. And I think that's the difference. That's that slow drip. It's not that acute thing in combat, but it's that slow drip over a career. And if you're not processing it, if you're not talking about it, if you're not dealing with it, eventually it just becomes too heavy.
Yeah. And then you come home and you don't want to talk about it at home. And so now your family's like, oh, you're closed off. Like, what's going on? And so anyways, to your point, that's why I love Mighty Oaks and what we do at Mighty Oaks is because it helps people learn how to do that. Yeah. And it's important. And we don't talk about it enough in law enforcement. They don't talk about it enough in combat because we're supposed to be men. Yeah. And we don't talk about our feelings and we can't cry, whatever, right? Like it's the opposite of being a man. It's the opposite of leadership. And that's what we're supposed to do as men is to lead and protect our families. And we need to do that in a healthy way. And that's part of doing that in a healthy way.
You know this, my son is a police officer. He has been for just over a year. So he's off probation now. Yeah. Right. But he's been around police work and that for a long time, or since he was a teenager. He was in the Explorer program. Then he was a CSO, non-sworn officer, but he's been sworn for a year, and it's awesome. Been a great department, and I'm really thankful for that. But man, this has been so important to me to engage these faith conversations with him. And he's solid. He's great, and I'm very proud of him for that. But even in the first year of him doing this work, him encountering things, and he's processed through that well. He's got good people around him. But man, you can't, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how people do it for 30 years or more without a relationship with Christ. I just don't get it.
I don't either. I don't know how you could, honestly.
You did. So you're a police officer, SWAT officer, you have, this great career. And then somehow you went from that, right, into kind of the marketing world and the media world. I haven't asked you how that happened. Yeah. So how did that happen?
So, So I love law enforcement. I love police work. And I think for a long time, I thought that it was all I would ever do. Yeah. And I think that was part of the challenge is that I felt like almost like falsely putting my identity in the fact that I was a cop, like we were talking about earlier. Yeah. And so I wrestled with that several times throughout my career because I was also very family oriented. Like my mindset, like I think coming from a broken home, I was like, I don't want this to happen in my life. So I hated missing holidays. I hated missing birthdays and weekends. And I hated working weekends. I hated working night shift because I wasn't home when my wife was at home. And so, I wrestled with that a lot, and I finally, something just struck me. I was, just kind of wrestling with this thought process, and I, right at 12 years of doing law enforcement, and I was like, man, if I had talked to somebody that had done 12 years in the Army, or I'd have been like, man, that's awesome, like great on you, And so eventually I realized that whatever you do, 2 years, 4 years, 6 years as a cop, as a combat veteran, whatever it is, right? Like, thank you for your service, like thank you for the contribution that you made to our society. And once I realized that, then it was much easier for me to think about doing something else. And so, the funny side of that is, I mean, those who are listening may know of the guy, Liver King.
Some have heard of him.
Some have heard of him. Yeah. So he lives here in Texas, and I happen to be good friends with Liver King. Brian Johnson is Liver King's name. With Brian's good friend, Michael is his name. Yeah. So we have a mutual good friend. Yeah. And we had done jiu-jitsu together and had done CrossFit together. He's a good guy. And they were starting a new company called The Fittest. Which was kind of like a spinoff of his original company that was more geared towards performance and athletes. And so Michael just kind of liked the type of person I was and wanted me to come over and help start The Fittest and run The Fittest.
Did you have experience in that? I mean, did you have
No. I mean,
he just liked you and said, yeah.
I think he just liked my leadership and my character style. You know, I think I had helped a buddy of mine kind of start a small company. So I had, like very small, minimal experience. But I was really good at motivating people. And that's what this brand was going to be, like a motivational brand. And like a very brand. And so I think he was just like, oh, this guy's perfect for this job. Yeah. And so during that time, it was a heavy season for us. We had a small, my son was small. We had adopted a teenager, in law enforcement, which we can talk about that story. Yeah. And so there's a lot going on, and he offered me this job. It was great money. I was going to get off weekends, holidays, and it would be in a field that I liked, fitness. I love health and fitness. Yeah. And so I talked with my wife about it, and we were like, man, this is a gamble because we don't know where it's going to go, but it's an opportunity. And so we took it, we took a leap of faith,
and it worked out.
It worked out.
It had a really rough ending.
It did. Yeah.
But it seems like it was a good season for you anyhow.
Yeah, honestly. And I don't think, like this is the Lord's plan for us, right? Like I don't know that I would have ever come on to Mighty Oaks full time if I had not been in that position. Yeah. I don't know that I would have left law enforcement to come to Mighty Oaks full time. But that opportunity got me out of law enforcement. Yeah. And then obviously I was presented with the opportunity to come on full time at Mighty Oaks. And so, the path there is clear. And like you said, it didn't end. It kind of ended weird, with everything that happened with Liver King and the company. But it created this opportunity for me to do this. And
it's funny. I have these conversations with people about, God's will and, what's God's will. And when people ask that, it's almost like they're afraid if they take the wrong step, they've missed God's will and they can never come back, right? Like your life is over.
Yeah.
And I can just look at my own life and look at these, what seem like disjointed pieces that God then brings together.
Yeah.
And the work that I'm able to do now is the consequence or the result of these other pieces that I had to go through. I had to learn these things and do these things so that now I can do what I do. And that's how God works. We don't have to be afraid that we're going to somehow miss God's will, right? God will use those steps to get you to where He really wants you to be.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, obviously, I try to discern every.
Yeah, of course, you have to be careful.
Of course,
sure,
right?
For sure.
But as long as it doesn't break some what I've identified as just my own personal, like, okay, if there's anything in this that's going to, not reflect the character that I currently want to reflect.
Right.
Is it going to dishonor God in any way, shape, or form? Is it going to hurt or dishonor my family in any way, shape, or form? Yeah. If the answer is no to any one of those questions, then I think people often look for like a clear answer of yes or no. Like, Lord, open or close the door,
send me a letter.
And the door's cracked the whole time. Like the door's cracked, and it's like, well, then I think it's okay at that point to evaluate. Okay, well, I think this is a good step, so I'm going to step that way. And you're obviously you're deep enough in your walk, the Lord will let you know if it's a wrong decision. Yeah. But sometimes sometimes there's not a right or wrong decision.
Sure.
And I think often people look for and often miss opportunities because they're looking for the yes or the no. Yeah. And it doesn't come.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this journey has been amazing. I'm sitting on a podcast.
Yeah.
I work for an amazing organization. I have way more balance in my life than I've ever had because there was no yes or no clear.
Yeah.
But there was it doesn't destroy these things that are important to me.
That's good.
And so I took a step and it's led me to here.
That's good.
Yeah.
We the title of the podcast is March or Die, right? And you have to come to these points in your life where you stay where you are and die. I mean, that's death, right?
Yeah.
Death is, it's emotional, it's spiritual sometimes, it's relational. It's not physical in that you're no longer functioning.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are functioning, but on the inside they're dead because they're not progressing.
Yeah.
And marching is just putting one foot in front of the other and continuing forward. And I think that's how God moves. And people have said this, God can't steer a solid ship or a ship that's not moving, right? Like you have to be moving so that God can steer that. And we sit and wait and we're like, well, if God has a plan, He's going to blow me out of this chair and get me there. I don't think that's how God works.
Yeah.
Take the next step.
It takes action.
Yeah.
It does. It absolutely takes action. Yeah, man, this passive, like, Lord's just going to make things work for me is delusional.
Yeah.
You got to be moving in order for him to guide your path.
Yeah. And all those that God has used were people who were moving. The Bible says, be still and know that I'm God. But that be still of spirit, be still in your heart. I think it even speaks to be willing to let me direct you.
Yeah.
Let me be God, but continue doing the thing that I've set in front of you. And while I do that, or while you do that, then I'll continue to work. And I think it's so important. And when we talk about the sovereignty of God, right? These are just thoughts popping into my head hearing you talk about that. I think sovereignty is like God is micromanaging every aspect of my life. To me, sovereignty is God. Ultimately, his plan comes together. He's God. So he brings the pieces together, but in that he, gives us the ability to make decisions and to take steps and to trust him and to follow him. And that's a big part of the Christian life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think without, even without those steps that maybe even are missteps, you're missing out on the character building that the Lord does in those moments. I've heard this, and I don't know who said it, so I'm going to pretend like it's me.
Yeah.
But, it's like God allows detours in a life, and everybody hates detours. We're driving down the road, and there's this detour, it creates traffic, it's bumpy, it's out of the way, it's like disruptive to your time. But the detour is so important for the real work to be done on the roadway. And during that detour, that's when the Lord's doing the real work. And so, man, if you're not struggling in life in some way, I'm not saying you got to be like, like dying every single day.
Yeah.
But if you're not struggling, then I would find a way to challenge yourself, because the Lord does the real work when you're being challenged.
Yeah, growth comes on the other side of resistance, and that's whether it's physical, spiritual, emotional, relational.
Yeah.
There has to be resistance.
Yeah.
There's a lot more we could talk about. I would love for you to take some time, though, if with kind of our remaining time, and tell as much of the story as you're willing to tell. But while you were in law enforcement, you met a young lady, and you and your wife decided to adopt. Can you tell that story, or as much of that as you'd like to tell?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to tell it. I'll do my best not to get emotional, but I'll fight you if you want to challenge me. No.
I think this story speaks to like who you are, right? And I love it because it reflects that.
Yeah. So I love to talk about the story. I really do. Because I think, it's God's story, but I think people see somebody, and I'm just using me as an example, not that I'm the most manly man in the world. But they see a SWAT officer, and I'm a professional fighter, and he's a jiu-jitsu black belt. He shoots guns all the time. But they don't, they think that that's all men should be. And like, men are loving and kind and compassionate and empathetic. And, yes, they're strong and skillful and powerful and dangerous as they should be, but not without love, kindness, gentleness, So, I get this call at a youth shelter. There's a youth shelter in the city that I worked at. And, we honestly get calls there all the time, as you can imagine. It's just kids, and it's a co-ed. So there's male and female youth there. So just problems, lots of problems. So it's very, very common for us to get called out there. So I get called out there one day for a kid who had ran away, and I'm trying to get information for him so we can find him. Cause outside of the shelter, these kids have nothing, they're placed here as their placement. Their parents either don't want them or have lost custody to them, or aren't around, whatever the case may be. Broken, very broken.
Yeah.
And so I'm there getting information about this kid, and this young girl walks in, and she starts telling me about the kid and where he might be and some information. And so I'm talking with her, and I realize that she's a youth in the shelter as well. And so she's telling me the information, and this has never happened to me before. I'm talking to her, and I heard in my own conscience, it wasn't like some booming voice, right. It was my own conscious, but I don't remember, there was nothing in the conversation that would have caused me to have this thought, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But in my conscience, I heard myself say, there's something you can do for this girl. And so it was so weird to me. I'll get goosebumps because it like shook me because it was like, that's how odd it was to me. That thought came into my head. It like shook me. And so I'm taking this information from her, and I asked the shelter a little bit more about, what's going on there. And I end up leaving, and I'm like nearly in tears. Like, I'm so shook by it. And I text my wife like, hey, let's adopt this teenager from the shelter. And I don't remember her exact words, but it was along the lines of bring her home. Like, just like that. No, what are you talking about? You're whatever. Like, I mean, bring her home. And so I go home, we talk about it. And we had talked about adoption before. But at this point we had a biological son. And so we kind of kicked that kind of off to the side. And so I'm talking with my wife about it, and we're wrestling with it, and we decided, hey, well, we should get to know her a little bit. And so that's kind of like where we're at. Well, over the course of the next week or two, I get dispatched to this shelter multiple times, which, as I said, it's not uncommon. Yeah, but it is uncommon for the same police officer to get dispatched there over and over and over again. Right. And so, and every time it gives me an opportunity to talk with Naya. It's my daughter's name. And so every time we're just, kind of developing a more connection. So one time I actually get dispatched there, and it's because she had gotten into a fight with one of the other kids. And so every time we go to a disturbance, we always separate the parties, right? And one officer goes with one officer goes with the other party. So I end up taking Naya outside, and I'm talking with her, and she's super emotional, heightened emotion. And so this is the first time I've kind of had like her separate from other people, from the other kids. And so I'm talking with her, and I just kind of felt like in that moment, the Lord was like, hey, you should ask her if she's interested in help. I didn't know what this is at this point. Like, I don't know if we're just like going to mentor her, or like, she's close to aging out of the system. And then after that, it's they're pretty much on their own. They can have some opportunities to try to go to like halfway houses type situations. But for the most part, it's like, you're done. Like, the state benefits that you get are gone. And so she's super emotional. And so I ask her, hey, I feel like, I tell her I'm a Christian. I feel like the Lord's telling me that there's something, my wife and I, like, there's something that we want to do to support you, to help you. And she gets super quiet, and I don't know what that means, Right. And she starts getting super emotional, and she starts crying, and I'm like, oh, she doesn't want that, I'm like, who knows? So I'm like, if I don't know what, I'm not trying to, no, that's really off, odd. But she says, through her choked words, that she says, nobody wants to help. She said, people come here and they volunteer their time because they want to feel better about themselves. And now there's some hurt in that. People do it for good reasons, but there's, to a child who lives in a place that is a revolving door for not only volunteers, but for staff. The staff's not consistent there. Right. That's what they see. Yeah. They don't see love. Yeah. They see an obligation. And so she gets emotional. I'm like, okay, well, I don't know what that looks like. I was like, are you interested in that? So we end up volunteering there, get to know her a little bit, and for, hopes of this not turning into a 2-hour conversation. Within the course, man, I don't remember, it was some ridiculously short time. I want to say it was for sure less than 6 weeks, less than a month and a half from the time I've met Naya to the time the Lord's working through this entire time, like sending me there, right, to meet her, and to meet her over and over again, and then to send me to be there when she's in a fight and in a heightened emotional state, and to all the way up to the point to where we're in the courtroom with her, and her attorney calls us out and says, hey, I think I can get the judge to give y'all what's called primary conservatorship. So the mother had not lost complete rights from her, but the mother didn't want her. Yeah. And so they gave us what's called primary conservatorship, which allows us to act as parents, but we don't have, we're not parental.
Sure.
We don't have we're not on our birth certificate, like so she's like, do y'all want to do that? And of course we're like in the courtroom, so we look at each other and we're like, yeah, sure, we'll do it. And so from the time of meeting Naya to the time of bringing her home later that day, we brought her home for a little bit and then I had to pick her up like a week later, was like less than 6 weeks.
Wow.
Which is, anybody who's listening to the show that knows anybody that's been through any type of adoption process, it's a minimum months to years. I know people 2 years,
of course,
2 to 3 years, they're going through the process.
We have a friend that just adopted and, I think almost 4 years.
Yeah. I have a friend that took them 2 years to get their son that they just adopted. And so, not that the Lord's not working in those moments. He obviously is, right? Yeah. But this child's about to age out. Yeah. And there was a lot of things that worked in our favor. They're probably looking at, here's this cop, that's works for this city, so, and realistically, honestly, they were probably like, this is an opportunity for us to wash our hands of this older kid, and so we bring her home and we live in a home that could accommodate her. It's had extra bedrooms. And so we bring her home and into our lives and pretty wild. She had a child. So we were parents of a almost 2-year-old one day, and the next day parents of a teenager and grandparents of a less than 1-year-old.
That's crazy.
So it's pretty wild. And the story goes from there, right? Lots of ups and downs. Lots of hardships. Great while we were home with consistency and structure. This was when she was 16, 17, bringing her home. Now she's 22. So, lots, kids coming from that type of a background, it's a lot of trauma.
Sure.
But I talk about this a lot, and you've probably heard me say this before, but something that my wife and I hope is encouraging for anybody listening, whether it's in a similar situation or a completely different situation, is that we chose to be obedient regardless of the outcome. And the story's not done yet.
Right.
The Lord's still working the story.
Right.
But the Lord asked us to be obedient and to say yes in that moment, and we did so without considering the consequences of our decision. And I think that a lot of times in life as humans, because we're broken people, we evaluate the yes with the potential outcome.
Some kind of a condition on that, yes.
Correct, right? Yeah. So it's like, oh yeah, okay, well, I feel like the Lord's asking me to do this, but what could happen if I do this, and we're not perfect, but the Lord softened our heart enough to be obedient in that moment, knowing that it was going to be full of hardship. And it's been wildly life-giving to us, just as a side note, very hard, but strengthened mine and my wife's marriage even beyond what it already was.
Yeah. Your son, how did he respond to all of that?
So great. He's 2, so here he is, gets this, teenage sister, and she's great. She's plays with him all the time, loves him. So he loves it. And there's some hardship with, when she left and kind of some of the ups and downs of that, him having to wrestle with that. And, some things that she did that were poor choices and that were publicly known that he had to, we had to explain to him, those hard conversations with. But man, he absolutely loves her. Yeah. He loves her. She comes around and he's like, even at this, he's 7 now, so he'll go up and crawl up in her lap and he adores her.
That's very cool.
Yeah. It's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And I appreciate it. There's a lot more we could get into.
Yeah.
But that's the wave tops of Sean Kennard's life.
Yeah, for sure.
Wave tops. One of the things we're going to do, you and I, is continue to have not just conversations about each other, but have conversations on various topics that are important to us.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about that. For those that have been listening to the March or Die show for a while or watching it, I think this show has been going on for almost 4 years. And so a lot of conversations, a lot of guests. And when I don't have a guest, typically I'll do a solo episode. And I might still do that from time to time. But in lieu of solo episodes, you and I are going to sit down and have these conversations, which I'm excited about.
I'm pumped, man.
Because I tend to preach when I'm by myself. So, so it's better for us to just have a conversation.
You do some good preaching.
Well, I don't know. That gets tiring, right? So I think we have some good opportunities, and we've got some good conversations and good topics coming up, and I'm excited about it. One of the blessings of the work that we do is we're consistently engaging with what I think are very important questions.
Yeah.
And we have to work through that, and we work through that with other people and try to come to important answers. And you and I are going to break some of that down. So pretty stoked about it.
I'm super pumped, man.
So thanks.
Can't wait. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Looking forward to it. And what are we going to record next? We're going to talk about identity and purpose.
Yeah.
These are the two big ones, right?
Yeah.
So
it'll be
got a lot of good stuff.
It's going to be fun.
It's going to be fun. But we'll get into that, and we'll let you know when that comes out if you are listening. And again, if you have not subscribed, do that now. Go ahead and subscribe, and we'll push these episodes out to you. Follow us on YouTube, follow us on your favorite podcast platform, and take some time. If you are listening to the audio, go to lifeaudio.com. Great platform, great content there as well, and check them out. Again, thank you, Sean.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Thank you to the rest of you for listening and for watching, and we will talk to you next time.